Hi, good morning, everybody, and pleasure to be part of AidEx Africa. And I feel that AidEx Africa, I myself, and the organization go hand in hand together. When Nicholas discussed with me a couple of years back about the possibility of AidEx Africa, I and my team, we didn't look at it as basically exhibition. We didn't look at it as sponsorship or business proposal or anything like that. We looked at it as a duty towards people of Africa and as our input for the betterment of the lifestyle for people of Africa. So for us, it's not just exhibition, it's not just basically a platform, but rather giving the much needed input into the society and to the continent. I'm grateful to Nicholas and his team and in all the, you can say, affiliates of AidEx, whether it's AidEx Africa or AidEx Brussels. Everyone working hand in hand, complementing both AidExes for their basically support, input, and continuation. And with that, basically, we have managed to come together and launch today's AidEx Africa exhibition. Sadly, we are not together. Normally, I travel to Africa, to Kenya, basically to attend these exhibitions and to meet people face to face. But due to current situation with the pandemic and travel, I wouldn't say restrictions, but travel related challenges and health advices and so on, we are where we are. Basically, we're meeting virtually, at least better than you can say not meeting at all. And I hope that everyone will be able to benefit out of today's session. And we definitely come out from this meeting today with a clear vision, clear motivation, and one direction for the sake of humanity. It is my pleasure to be part of the organization and to be part of basically development force for Africa. We from our side will try to do whatever we can and we're trying our best. But Africa is basically literally as much as we do is still is not enough. So don't look at the efforts we have done, don't look at the achievements, but look at the milestones and look at the targets, look at the tasks that needs to be done. Africa is rich continent, is basically full of history, full of, you can say, resources, natural minerals and so on, which needs to be explored. And the biggest beneficiaries of that needs to be people of Africa. Sadly, those resources and you can say even with gold mine and whatever, basically the beneficiaries have been others, but people of Africa. The people of Africa are least responsible for the climate situation and climate challenges in the world. Yet they are the biggest victims of the natural disaster and climate challenges, and it's affecting their entire lifestyle from drinking first drop of water to having enough water to wash dead bodies. So literally, it is very tough situation, very challenging situation, and I really hope and pray that we can come together and make coming year 2022, better than 2020, 2021 indeed. In today's conference, you will hear basically a number of speakers tackling the much needed issues, talking about important aspects of our work which is needed, and basically bringing you opportunities commercially, financially, as well as basically humanitarian wise. AidEx is a leading organization bringing basically connecting the commercial sector with the humanitarian sector and bridging it with the access to public. So my pleasure to be with you today, and I hope that you will benefit out of this as best as you can. I don't want to be, you can say, hurdle between yourself and the speakers. So I'll pass on further and allow them to speak to you directly. And I will see you at the closing remarks after a few hours. Thank you very much. Best regards.
Many thanks, Imam Kazim, especially so because Imam Kazim just became a granddad a few moments ago, so I should imagine he's got some other things to attend to. Thank you so much for your insight and kind words. Our webinar series will take place today and tomorrow, and whilst there'll be lots of coverage on Kenya, we'll approach the theme from a wider East African perspective, with contributions from neighbours like Uganda and Tanzania. As participants in this event, I would encourage you to contribute as much as you can. Please click the questions button at the bottom of your screen to add any questions you may have after the many and varied presentations for our panelists to answer at the end of each discussion. Also, can the audience hover over the screen and in the bottom right corner, click on the cog and switch from HD to 360p, which will improve the experience and decrease bandwidth for us all. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our two keynote speakers. Ambassador Mirjam Blaak, Head of Mission for the Ugandan Embassy in Brussels, will provide an overview and deeper understanding for this event, followed by Mike Foster, Head of Economic Development and Climate Change at the British High Commission in Nairobi, who will examine how government, civil society and business can work more closely together to meet the economic challenges of COVID-19. So it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Mirjam.
Yes, good morning to you all. And thank you so much, Nicholas, the director, and of course, Imam Qasim from the Khair Foundation for being able to host this wonderful event. I see many people online, which give me great pleasure because that means there's a great interest, especially through the lack of meeting physically, which of course would be our preferred option. But good morning to you all. I have the pleasure to discuss and at least find a few ways of how to resolve issues and what lessons we have learned and the impact of the COVID-19 on East Africa, for perhaps the need for a better healthcare system, for sure, and building a future together. I would like to start certainly by giving you a bit of a historic overview of how the pandemic reached Africa in order to get a better understanding and also to make like a link with how the EU countries in Europe have actually handled the pandemic. And what happened to us, we were organizing an EU-Uganda business forum last year in March. And suddenly, I was, of course, very much involved in the organization. And there were about 1,000 people expected for this particular forum. And then we, as a government of Uganda, took the decision to not allow participants from Italy, France, Germany, and Spain, because the pandemic had reached rather worrying proportions there, not knowing what was in stock for us much later. So in spite of that, we had a very successful conference, which was the last big one that was held in our country. But of course, it was to be regretted that we had to refuse some of the nationals of those countries that were already heavily affected. And it brought us some misunderstandings with the EU, who said, no, this has been organized, why are you refusing? And I had to do a lot of explaining. And I said, listen, this COVID-19 pandemic has come from China to Italy, and we don't want it in Africa. You are bringing it to us. And I was using the argument. I said, don't you remember then when we had the Ebola crisis in Africa, you refused many nationals to travel to the EU because you didn't want to have Ebola there either. So now we are in a similar situation. And that actually we have to protect ourselves. So I'm sorry, but the government has decided that those nationals are not able to come. Now, what you can see actually from the lessons learned also in the EU, when Italy cried out for help because it was terrible, the situation when it exploded there almost, no other EU country came to the assistance of Italy until eventually, China, who had actually brought the pandemic there, had to come with offering protective gear, masks and suits and whatever, because they couldn't handle the situation. Unfortunately, I know there may be many EU members listening into this webinar today, but I feel it's one of the greatest failures of the EU for not having been able to prepare in unity any kind of strategy to help countries that were more affected than others, etc. And what you saw happening, which is to be regretted, but in a way it also happened in Africa, is that countries were closing their borders, like from Netherlands and Belgium. The border had never been closed since the Second World War, and the border was suddenly closed for weeks. People could not, I had difficulties getting back into Belgium. So it was really a great disaster, actually. And I'm just wondering whether we've overcome it. I'm glad that the EU is now finding unity in dealing with the vaccines, although even there are lots of disagreements and uncertainty and actually the lack of clarity. The world is getting smaller, and the need to cooperate is even greater, especially when we are all confronted with a huge pandemic like COVID-19. And what has been happening, and also as I already alluded to in Africa, is that people becoming very concerned about themselves. So it is me, my country, for myself, and God for us all. I mean, for us in Uganda, we are a land-linked country. And we have, of course, borders with Kenya and Tanzania. We had to screen all the truck drivers. And as you know, we are also the gateway to Eastern Congo, to Rwanda, to Burundi. So it was a big problem at the border. I remember seeing videos of long queues of trucks that were all waiting at the border to be screened. So there is certainly a need to do things better. But what to do? Of course, many truck drivers who may have been negative on entry, who turned positive later, have also infected our population, even going on to South Sudan. So it was through these type of movements that the Africans were infected further and further. Then another fact is that we in the health services were strained. They were not prepared. There was not enough oxygen. And even up to now, we haven't seen any cure or medicine for COVID-19. What we are doing is trying to prevent it by having vaccinations, but there is actually no cure. Since there was no cure, and since the effects of COVID pandemic were disastrous, there were very strict measures of confinement that led to, of course, food crisis for especially the urban population. And I will not dwell so much on this, as there is a special session dealing with the food crisis. But obviously what we had to do in Uganda, we had to actually donate food to the needy, especially the poorer people living in urban areas who had no access to food. And of course, it was not an easy operation. I heard also sometimes food didn't reach. So we now have investigations as well as that food gone. Some of it may have been sold, may have been, we don't know what happened. But so these are a whole row of negative consequences that are rising out of this. Now, how can people work together to overcome the pandemic? I think one thing that is certainly required is solidarity. We are each as individuals responsible towards each other. We live in a society, as I said, the world is getting smaller, and we need to make sure that whatever we do, we act in a transparent way, especially when it deals with infectious diseases. Luckily, in Africa, I must admit, surely in the DRC as well as in Uganda, we have dealt with the Ebola crisis. So we had already learned on how to deal with infections and cordoned off certain areas where the infection was most drastic and not allowing others to move from that area. So certainly the Ebola crisis has also given us already a lessons learned, and therefore we may have been better prepared than others in developed countries. Now, where we have gone wrong as well is last year we allowed the school children to go back to school, but only after a few days. The headmasters of those schools realized that many school kids have been infected, and the schools subsequently were closed again. So the children go home and now start infecting their parents. And so that is the reason why for us in Uganda, we haven't reopened the schools, because we feel that we first want to vaccinate the teachers so that the risk of transmission is much less. Then, of course, I would like to say that we do have a lot of solidarity in Africa. We are much closer to families, to our society, and much more closely knit than in Europe. And that's what you can see what happened in Europe. It's mostly the people in the old people's homes who are left on their own and who are, less able to resist being infected because they had other underlying problems, were the ones first to go. And that one is of course very sad. Even they couldn't be visited by their children and grandchildren, and at least it's done, I think, a lot of harm to the social cohesion in countries and in families, especially as it was not able to basically socialize and be together, which I think has brought about a lot of psychological problems, even in the youngsters who weren't able to go to school, but also in the old people who are not having so long to live, who are missing very much the real contact, the hugs, the kisses from their close family members. So it is not so easy, I think, to overcome such a pandemic, but people have to work together and take responsibility. That's how I would like to conclude on that particular aspect. How to build resilience? Well, that is also not so easy, because in Africa, it is, even though the social cohesion is much greater, we have no financial backing, such as they did in Europe. In Europe, when people couldn't go to work or companies were about to go bankrupt, the governments actually stepped in and gave a lot of financial contributions, subsidies, etc. And individual sums of money were given to people who'd lost work or who were basically self-employed. So there, because you are richer, you have, of course, a sort of I would say, financial backup, which in Africa, certainly, we don't have. So when people don't have work, they don't have income, and having no income is actually having no food. So it is quite difficult. And then I would like to say, how is the next issue is how can governments work together? Well, I already stated it. In the EU, there was no collaboration of governments. In fact, everything sort of split into groups and into countries themselves. Luckily, when the pandemic was reaching its top, I know that some people from the Netherlands, where there are not enough ICU units, went to Germany, where there was a higher capacity that was still available. Of course, in terms of governments working together, we also have the COVAX scheme. And the COVAX scheme that has been developed by the UN and by rich countries is able to provide vaccinations to us, the developing countries, who are surely bearing the brunt of this crisis. There are lots of vaccine shortages, as we've all been crying out for more. We as ambassadors have been assigned to look for more vaccines, because what had happened, and that is when countries are looking inward and no longer take responsibility for the rest of the world and for the poor, is when first they said, okay, one shot, then they came with a second shot. First it was for the elderly, then the rest of the population, and now in many of the developed countries, they are starting to also vaccinate the children. Which meant there were huge shortages, and after the first dose of under the COVAX schemes we had received, we were basically left to suffer, because what we have seen is that the pandemic can actually be mastered somehow by vaccinating huge populations. For us in Uganda, we have only vaccinated 1.1% of the people that we wanted to vaccinate. So it is not something that we are proud of, but at the same time, as you all know, the developing countries were hoarding their vaccines, were giving priority to themselves before they could allow any export to the developing countries, like for us in Africa. And what is even worse now, and you may have all heard about it, and we are fighting it also in Brussels with luckily other ambassadors, is that the vaccines that we have received under the first COVAX release was from AstraZeneca, produced in India. And then the EU came with the following decision, that the vaccines produced in India were apparently not as good as the AstraZeneca vaccines produced elsewhere, and they didn't recognize them under the EMA, which is the medical body, the authority that deals with approving the vaccinations. Luckily, we have fought in a way successfully, because at least one country has recognized the AstraZeneca vaccinations from Africa, and that is Belgium. And we hope that others are to follow. I must admit that in this particular lessons learned, we also realize that the rich countries, of course, have the upper hand in everything. And that maybe not recognizing the vaccinations that were already given to Africans, and by refusing them to enter, is another tool for having less Africans come to the EU. We know that there is the boats on the Mediterranean Sea, and thousands of people have died, and still hundreds are trying to cross. The EU is very dedicated to ensure that nobody leaves the shores of Africa on any beach. And this may be another way of preventing more Africans from coming to Europe, which is, I think, very much to be regretted. Because as the Imam has already stated, Africa is probably the richest continent in the whole world, yet we are still the poorest. So what are we doing wrong? And I think, of course, apart from the colonization periods, we also have not maybe fought enough to become independent from handouts. And that is, I would say, something that we have to look to in the future. We have to become independent from Europe in every way. So that is why, at least, I'm happy that my president Museveni has already launched a huge drive, not only to have our own vaccinations to be produced in our country, but we also have already discovered some medicinal herbs and trees that could actually serve as a cure for COVID-19. And you may have heard about it. Is Dr. Ogwang, who is a pharmacist and a medical doctor, has discovered AidEx, it's called. It's a small bottle that you can take drops of in the throat 3 times a day, only when you have COVID-19. So it doesn't serve as a prophylaxis. So I would say that the lessons learned definitely is towards getting our own vaccines produced, and probably, like our government is already doing is ensure that there is more budget and more money available for the pharmacopoeia to discover our own medicines and to treat our diseases. Now, I would say the astonishing aspect of this AidEx and maybe others who have discovered herbal medicine in other countries is that when Dr. Ogwang went and gave a little video on YouTube about this medicine that apparently already rescued many people who were, some of them were even on the ICU, and they basically recovered from this disease. There is yet no medicine other than taking some antibiotics and vitamins, etc., that is curing COVID-19. So what happened? Dr. Ogwang had released his video. It was put on YouTube. Within 24 hours, it was taken off. And with that, I only want to say that it must be the huge pharmaceutical lobby in the world, which are now earning billions and billions of dollars out of this crisis, are the ones who have had a great impact as to what happens on maybe a channel like YouTube. It said it was a violation of the YouTube regulations. But basically, they don't want to hear about any cheap medicine that is discovered by maybe a poor country like Uganda that actually can rescue the rest of the world and should therefore be prevented from being known to the others. And I think that is, for me, a very strong indication that we're on the right way, the right path. Let us in Africa discover more. Because after all, the whole pharmaceutical industry around the world have taken a lot of our herbs that they are then producing identical in a chemical laboratory and make a medicine out of it. So, and then they are the ones earning. We have to then import those medications at high cost, very high cost. While in actual fact, the basis of these medicines are to be found in our own African soil. So really, I think we have to do better. We have to step up our own, and we should be more self-assured. We have so much. We have a lot of very intelligent people. We have academia who can actually be putting their heads together to discover more. And so there is much more capacity within us that we believe we don't have. And I hope that all the civil society and the NGOs will, well, you are certainly agreeing with me, you are much closer to the people on the ground, on the grassroots level than many of us are. And I do appreciate all the work that you are doing. And I would like to say, please help us to achieve that. We need a certain independence from everything that we rely on at the moment. And there is a need for us to regain our own trust and our own confidence in Africa itself. So yes, what other governments are doing, I think the AU, the African Union, has also indeed already taken measures to speak for Africa as a continent. So those ones are ongoing in relation to the EU, in relation to the COVAX schemes, etc. But at least we are not yet over the pandemic. I wish I could be more optimistic than that. In Uganda, in 1 year, we only had, 15 months, we only had 400 deaths, which is, of course, ridiculously low. Part of it may be due to the very strict quarantine measures and that we had. But then we suddenly had, in June, we had what we call then the second wave, and that was basically brought upon us by the Delta variant that suddenly emerged and was much more affecting many people, old and young. And so we are still fighting that particular variant. So I think these were some of the notes that I had prepared. I don't know whether there's a lot of discussion possible for me at this particular stage, because you have so many speakers, you have so many specialized sessions that are going to be very, very interesting. And I hope I can join you maybe a little bit later. I have 2 more virtual meetings right now. I mean, in about half an hour, so I'll still be with you. And maybe I'll leave it to to Nicholas and others to help me if there are already immediate questions, or whether those questions will have to wait until you have your specialized session, so that maybe we'll come back to it at a later stage. I would like to say an appeal to all the NGOs, please do help us, but help us to become self-reliant, and help us, of course, with the basic needs that we do need to have in health services, because those ones have been lacking a lot, as we all know. Priorities are too many, so sometimes you worry as a government, you're doing too much here and not enough there. So when you have some little budget, you have to make these priorities, and we have invested heavily in the health services now because there was a great need to do so. But we are also relying on all our partners, developing partners, to assist us in Africa, and especially in East Africa, to do better. What I've also seen, and that's maybe a last remark, we haven't reached that stage because, as I told you before, we haven't reached the stage of having so many people vaccinated. And what you see happening now is a conflict within societies, within families, of those ones who wish to be vaccinated and others who don't wish to be vaccinated. Now, this may be a problem that is for us yet to come once we have more people vaccinated, but I foresee that it is rather problematic, as governments may force vaccinations and therefore limit the freedom of movement and the freedom of socializing with other groups in certain countries. One thing that I would like to say has actually surprised a lot of people, virologists, scientists and others, that in Africa, the infection rate as compared to many in Europe was very low. And it may be because we are living outside a lot. We have more vitamin D because we have more sunshine. Maybe we have had other vaccinations which had a positive effect on our immunity. And that may be the reason why there are less infections in Africa. So let us also continue our efforts in order to drive the vaccination movement up. There is no question about it that we shall try and strive for more people to be vaccinated. For us now, our priority in Uganda, at least, is to have the teachers and professors at universities vaccinated so that we can reopen schools, university, and other learning institutions. I think I'll leave it at that. I hope I haven't overstepped my time limits, Nicholas, but I know there is so much to be said about this. I'm grateful to all of you for having listened, and I hope I have stirred up the debate a little bit for later. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
You certainly have, Ambassador. Thank you so much for your time. Your very interesting thoughts, your experience of Uganda, Africa more widely, and of course the EU. I feel like you've put us on the inside track, and we have some very interesting material to work with. So thank you again for your participation. Much appreciated.